Hey everyone, let's talk about chapter 15 of No Man Knows My History, The Valley of God. We're talking here about the expulsion of the saints from Kirtland and Joseph Smith going to Missouri. And the Missouri saints have been there, I think, since 1831. And now we are in 1838. So there have been saints in Missouri without their main prophet near them for 7+ years, and they are ecstatic to have their prophet come back. We talked in the last chapter about how it's so staggering that Joseph Smith can take so many defeats in his public reputation and have so many falling out experiences with his trusted allies and people dissenting and defecting from the church. How does this guy still have a platform? I think of it like college football. You may know the coach Urban Meyer, who recently just was in the NFL as the coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars for one season and was fired for horrible conduct, abusing players. And this is a guy that's had a lot of success in the football coaching world. And he, even after getting fired for really nasty conduct, he will probably have a job next year, because powerful people that have charisma and leadership, find themselves capable of getting jobs and positions of power and authority despite numerous accusations that have credible proof of their lack of virtue. If you look up Urban Myers, he has a storied history of doing some pretty shady stuff and surrounding himself with shady people in his coaching staff and things like that. So there are real life examples of things. If you think, how is Joseph Smith able to have this many bad things happen but still have so many people consider him a valuable leader that is trustworthy, etc.? So Joseph Smith questions Oliver Cowdery. I love the writing of this chapter. Fawn Brodie does an excellent job in the narrative of this chapter, I think. And so we talk about how Joseph finds it difficult to believe that Oliver Cowdery, of all people, would have issues with Joseph's leadership style, considering what the two of them had been through together. Joseph Smith is you just saw these angels and Jesus himself minister to us in the Kirtland temple, so why are you giving me a hard time and being so nitpicky? I think Oliver Cowdery is a victim of the sunk cost fallacy. I think there has to have been a point at which he realized that he had traded his decent average life for the life that he had with Mormonism. I think there has to have been at some point where he realized that he lost that gamble, and that he realized what a waste it all had been. And you start seeing the cracks happen at this point in time, where people like Oliver Cowdery that have been with Joseph since the beginning are starting to become more disillusioned by the day. So Mormons will equivocate. Mormons famously pancake back and forth about scriptural literalism. For example, evolution, the Darwinian model of survival of the fittest, passing on traits that help a species survive and evolving those traits over time, that is taught currently at BYU. If you go get a degree at Brigham Young University, you will take biology and you will learn evolution, as far as I'm aware. But then if you go worship at the temple, you will watch a video presentation that is now more just like a PowerPoint with voiceover, stating that Adam and Eve are the literal father and mother of the human race, and that we did not descend from natural selection through our primate ancestors, but we literally are the physical posterity of a single man and a woman that was created from his rib. Virtually everyone in the world in the educated Christian sphere believes now that the story of Genesis and the creation of the world is more a poetic metaphor, and not only very few people and congregations still preach biblical literalism. There's a lot of evangelical Christians, that movement being particularly strong in the United States, that do continue to preach that the flood was real as reported by the Old Testament. Ken Ham has the Ark experience, where you can go see Noah's Ark, and there are people that believe it's literal, and Mormons do as well. If you look at Mormon scripture teaching manuals for things like Seminary Institute from the 1980s and 1990s or early 2000s, they are chock full of quotes from Mormon church leaders testifying to the very reality of the world being 6,000 years old. In fact, I think it's Joseph Smith himself had that revealed to him by God in the Doctrine and Covenants, that the earth is 6,000 years old and that we are in the final dispensation. And so I think this is important to share and comment on, because I think there are a lot of Mormons today that have a lot of cognitive dissonance, that are trying to balance their feelings of discontent about, feeling like evolution obviously is how humanity came about, but then reading, going to the temple. This is speaking from my own experience. I remember going to the temple and just having that feeling of unease, of being like, this is really beautiful, but it's like, I don't really accept this as literal truth. And so Mormons will say that they are a super science forward, science embracing religion, and there are factions of believing Mormons who do embrace all of modern science, but to do so is to neglect the truth that Joseph Smith and his followers and early disciples in the first 2 decades of the Mormon Church were not so nuanced. They literally believed, Joseph Smith finds an altar in Missouri and says that this is literally where Adam prayed upon the altar. This valley itself is literally where Adam and Eve dwelt as they were expelled from the Garden of Eden. This area, this county that we are settling now, is literally the place where Cain killed Abel. Literal, not metaphorical. Again, you're starting to see apologetics shift in the Book of Mormon to perhaps the Book of Mormon is a metaphor. We don't have any archaeological evidence for the Book of Mormon, but I think all along we were supposed to interpret it as Mormon and Moroni being prophets that Joseph Smith invented to teach us in the latter days how we can grow closer to God. Again, that's fine to twist your interpretation, but you have to recognize how twisted that interpretation has to be in order for you to sleep at night without succumbing to that overwhelming burden of cognitive dissonance. So I just can't state that enough. Also, I think it's interesting that Joseph Smith says that Adam, is going to come back to this valley, Adam-ondi-Ahman, in the millennium, with thousands ministering unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 standing before him, which he's quoting the prophet Daniel in the Old Testament. Ask yourself, would you feel comfortable being in a position of power where people were ministering unto you? And it's like the Emperor's New Groove. Like, you've got your servants, people are fanning you, people are feeding you grapes from the vine. Would you feel comfortable with thousands of people literally being subjected to be your eternal servant? Because that is the hierarchy of God's priesthood. We will be priests and priestesses, kings and queens, to reign and rule over the house of Israel, And that means if there are rulers, there are servants. You have to remember that the theology of Christianity and Mormonism is inherently anti-democratic. Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world." It's a kingdom. God is the king, the master, the ruler of the universe, and we are his lowly servants. There is no way in which, even in Mormon doctrine, which is a lot more optimistic about our eternal progress and potential than other religions, even in our religion, nothing we can do. Every time we increase, God increases. And so there's this power dynamic that we can never overcome. So we can either choose to be one of the thousand servants ministering unto Adam, or we can recognize that that's actually a not healthy system, and that we should push for a system that is more equitable. It's important to contextualize a lot of the conflict and vitriol happening in Missouri through the lens of slavery, because that is one of the first things that people get upset about with the Mormons settling there. Is you've got a bunch of Yankees from the North who are generally culturally against the institution of slavery, using human beings against their will to profit off of. This is one of the huge, most significant moral failings of human history, is that we developed constitutions where some men are born free, but not all men are born free. And the conflict starts within the setting of the Missouri slaveholders being antsy about a new politically powerful group of settlers who can band together to potentially get rid of the institution of slavery, which is the only way that these people had a thriving economy. It's really easy to have a thriving economy if you do not pay laborers at all, and force them to have children that you can then raise into your economic system of exploitation. So the lawlessness that's inherent in the American law system, if you knew nothing about how the law works in the United States and you only read this book, you would come away with a really disturbing picture that, truthfully speaking, the laws that are the foundation of our country were written with the express intent of being able to take to court and abused by people who want to inflict suffering and harm onto other people. There are millions of people in for-profit the prison industrial complex in the United States. This slavery did not end with the Emancipation Proclamation by Abraham Lincoln. Slavery was modified and continues to this day, both to our neighbors that are people of color, who have all sorts of systemic racism that colors the way that they live their life, and the justice system, which was designed and manipulated particularly by Ronald Reagan and the Republicans in the late 20th century, specifically making as many laws as possible to put black people in prison and to manipulate the 13th Amendment so that they can use them for labor without paying them, due to the fact that they are in prison for such things as non-violent crime. I was just prescribed medical cannabis from my psychiatrist as a therapy tool, and as much as I am grateful that I have the opportunity to partake in this new and exciting form of therapy, my heart breaks because there are people in prison right now for using the same substances that I'm using for therapy. Those substances have robbed them of the opportunity to be fathers and mothers and husbands and wives and And we are ripping people away from their families for the same thing that I get to do because my doctor said it was good for me. So this stems, you're seeing a lot of this happen in Missouri, and I'm sorry for going on that tangent, but that is kind of the state that we're living in now, and so you can get an idea for just how much more lawless this state of Missouri was at the time that Joseph Smith moves there in 1838. And that is the context that we are living under. So there's a lot of tension. Now, I think it's so interesting to note that we've got this Samson Avard character who is kind of the, if Lyman White is the propagandist and the speaker riling the Mormon troops up to defend themselves, quote unquote, then Samson Avard is like the military genius, the Sun Tzu, who is going to actually have the military acumen to train up these troops to live up to the incendiary promises of Lyman White. Now it says that these men were to swear fraternal oaths binding them to everlasting secrecy, and they established a secret police for ferreting out dissenters among other tasks. This is as clear-cut of an example of secret combinations as you could hope for. The Book of Mormon talks heavily in the last quarter of the narrative about the danger of societies that include these sort of secret groups that have their fraternal oaths, and if you ask the leadership, does this group exist, they equivocate and dodge the question. The Book of Mormon talks, is it Lamoni? One of the, no, it's not Lamoni, sorry. One of the soldiers for the wicked Lamanites, who are the leader of the Gadianton robbers, writes to the righteous Nephites and says, hey, we have the manpower to destroy you. This is in the Book of Mormon. We have the manpower to destroy you at a moment's notice. So I implore you, we can destroy you, or you can join us. And I think the quote is, you can, quote, become acquainted with our secret works. The Danite group that this chapter introduced is the Gadianton robbers. They have a secret police. No one knows about it. If you ask about it because you heard a rumor, you are directed not to ask troubling questions. And this group, the evidence is presented by the sources, and that's why I read this footnote, because I think it's so important to understand that people and modern apologists cannot deny that this group existed, and the fact that it did exist is deeply, deeply concerning to anyone who believes in the narrative that the more early Mormon settlers were a group of righteous people who were persecuted simply because they had beliefs that were different than other people. Not true. Not true in the slightest. So, yeah, John Corll goes to some of these meetings, and he's one of the people that's looking around in total horror. He goes to Sidney Rigdon and says, hey, this is not the kind of vibe that we want to establish here. I'm not comfortable with this at all. We need to shut this down. Joseph Smith needs to know, if he doesn't already, that this is happening. And Rigdon says he communicated his shocked protest to Rigdon only to be advised to stay away from future meetings. There's so many parallels with this that's happening in far-right political extremism in the United States. Just this year, there was an insurrection on the United States Capitol. This was an attempted takeover of the United States government by far-right political extremists. And even in the age of media that we have now, it's amazing the extent to which that narrative has been every single political agenda has been utilized to spin a narrative about the events of that insurrection attempt, when the truth is it was far-right extremism. It wasn't fake news. They weren't fake flag paid actors So this is what's happening in the early Mormon church. We've got these Danites. It's a group. Joseph Smith knows without a shadow of a doubt that this group exists, that Lyman White is using incendiary language to fire up the saints. There's a lot of coded language about, oh, we're just here to defend ourselves. We don't want to do anything that's unlawful. We're just here to defend ourselves. Yeah, I don't know. Joseph Smith writes in his own history of the church, it says, it will soon be your privilege, he's talking to the Danites, to take your respective companies and go out on a scout on the borders of the settlements, and to take to yourselves spoils of the goods of the ungodly Gentiles. Ask me this, do people who defend themselves take spoils? People who take spoils are invaders, are ransackers. People who do the assaulting are the people who take the spoils. That kind of language is not for people that are interested in a harmless self-defense. That kind of language is utilized by people who are on a mission to hunt and exterminate enemies. Joseph Smith says in the same paragraph, I would swear a lie to clear any of you. And if one of this Danite society reveals any of these things, I will put him where the dogs cannot bite him. So, this group exists. It's extremely dangerous. This is paralleled in our modern society, both outside of the Mormon world and specifically within the Mormon world. The Deseret nationalist movement is a modern-day Danite group that believes that Mormons are destined to take over the world by the sword. Why should we preach the gospel with peace and love if we can force other people to build the kingdom of Zion on the earth? These people exist to this day. They're a bunch of sad people that have faceless profiles on Twitter. They bully and harass people who promote change within the Mormon church today to make the church a better place. So you should be aware that modern Danites exist, and they are of growing concern. And like Joseph Smith, President Russell M. Nelson and the current leadership of the Mormon Church are doing virtually nothing to stop this faction of the church, which I believe is rapidly growing as people's political allegiances are starting to draw them away from the church allegiance. So, this is a very serious chapter. It's not as juicy. There wasn't as much juicy, gossipy drama in this chapter, but the very real life concern is very significant as it pertains to many things going on in our world today. Joseph Smith says, if the people of the world will but let us alone, we will preach the gospel and live in peace. It's just no, that is so hilarious. I served a 2-year mission for the Mormon Church. I think if I were to poll the many hundreds of people that I stopped, because I was a good missionary, I did talk to literally everyone, as Preach My Gospel states. If I were to poll the people that I spoke to on my mission and tried to convert them, I would venture to guess that the overwhelming majority of people would consider us to be a nuisance, people that are pestering innocent people in public. I was at a Christmas tree lighting ceremony in Colorado a few weeks ago with some family, and I was stopped by the missionaries there who had set up a booth, and there was an entire district or zone of missionaries. There's probably 5 or 6 companionships of missionaries there, stopping these people on their fun day of celebrating the holiday season and the tree lighting, and there are people just bothering people about religion, and I would say that this statement is so tone deaf. If the people of this world will but let us alone, we will preach the gospel and live in peace. Yes, we would love if you would leave us alone. We don't want you to preach the gospel to us. We would like to live in peace. You sending your arrogant ignorant, naive teenage high school graduates to come to places of the world they've never been and commit cultural genocide. That is the antithesis of letting us live in peace. So yes, we would love to leave the church alone and let people worship as they may, as the 11th article of faith states, let people worship according to the dictates of their own conscience. But it seems like the missionary tactic of the church is to do the exact opposite and to get other people to go, well, you may be worshiping according to the dictates of your own conscience now, but if you would just read the Book of Mormon, you'd realize that your consciousness has been wrong this entire time, and that you really ought to change to our set of scriptures. It's so frustrating. And we've got this incendiary language against dissenters. You've got Lyman White and Samuel Avar, I don't remember his first name, but you've got these Danite leaders not only saying what they're saying, but they're saying not only are we going to antagonize and defend ourselves, quote unquote, from the Missourians that may or may not try to get in our way. If you don't agree with the tactics we're taking, then you are no worse than the Missourians, and we will erect a gallows and hang you from it. So imagine being a person that doesn't agree with the Danites, and you're Mormon, and you've given your entire life and sacrifice and family to the building up of the kingdom of God because you believe Joseph Smith is a prophet, and then these Danites come around with this unchecked power and incendiary language and secret police, and Joseph Smith is doing absolutely nothing to stop it, despite having been to and spoken with these Danites and their leaders. This is a really scary time for the church. The Danites, it says that the dissenting families who were cast out by the Danites, it says they robbed them of basically everything but their bedding and their clothes and told them to get out or they would die. There is a letter signed by dozens of prominent Latter-day Saint leaders, including Hiram Smith, telling people to get out of town. If you don't like what the Danites are doing, you don't have to be here, so get out and leave. And it says that the people who were pushed out by the pressure from the Danites says that they could not believe the level of violence and harassment they received from people who just weeks and months ago were their neighbors in Christ. There's Sidney Rigdon says, we will not suffer this anymore. Rigdon says, our cheeks have been given to the smiters, our heads to those who have plucked off the hair, etc. But from this day and hour we will suffer it no more. Do you remember what Peter did in the Garden of Gethsemane when the Roman legion finally caught up with Jesus? He cut off the legionnaire's ear. And Jesus, of course, heals the man on the spot miraculously, and Peter learns a valuable lesson that even the people that would torture and murder the Son of God do not deserve to have violence reciprocated upon them. I'm not a Christian myself, so I don't necessarily claim that to be my idea of a just world. I do think there are situations in which self-defense is ethical and virtuous, but if you are a Christian, explain to me how Sidney Rigdon gets the right to say, and from this day and hour we will suffer it no more. Why? You're tired of being a martyr? Isn't that what Christianity is all about? This is a fraud. These are not true Christians. You can tell that these are power-hungry men trying to carve out a name and reputation and a legacy for themselves and their families. These are not people who are true Christians, because Jesus makes it abundantly clear that there is never a time to fight violence with violence. The Danites are absolutely anathema to anything Jesus taught in the pure gospel of the New Testament. And I'm not even a Christian, and I can recognize that as being true. Yeah, it says they were weary of wearing the mantle of martyrdom and eager to unsheath their swords. I'm not saying that's not a natural, I get it. And also, it's important to remember that if we take the Missourians at their face value, which is the reason they're upset about the Mormons is because they're abolitionists, we should be on the side of abolitionists. And if Mormon settlers are the abolitionists, then I'm on their side in the sense of I'm on Team John Brown. I think that people who want to uphold the institution of slavery and those people's posterity that lead and govern today's modern prison industrial complex and for-profit prison system, those people are still alive. And I think that fight against them needs to continue on. So I don't believe in turning the other cheek. And I think it's important to remember that that was one of the major things that Mormons were receiving persecution for, true or not, is that the Missourians feared them because they thought they were abolitionists. So I'm not saying the Missourians are good people by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just so abundantly clear that these people are using Christianity to fire up their own people, to believe that they are fighting for a just God who is approving their cause. We've got a diary entry from William Swartzel in 1838 saying that Lyman White is using this extremely incendiary war hawk language, exhorting a war upon the peaceful citizens of Missouri. Again, peaceful citizens of Missouri, these are slaveholders. So I don't super feel sympathetic towards them that Lyman White is using this language, but it also seems like Lyman White isn't considering... I don't think Lyman White was a strong abolitionist. I think he was a power-hungry, violent man that he was bloodthirsty. So it says that those who do not embrace the Mormon faith are hypocrites, long-faced dupes, devils, infernal hobgoblins, and ghosts, and they ought to be damned and sent to hell where they properly belonged. Again, you can say, well, that was one person's opinion and doesn't necessarily represent the opinions of the church writ large. But Joseph Smith knew who this man was, allowed this man to retain such a high position of power, and it even proves in the footnotes and through the narrative, Fawn Brodie goes to great lengths to show that apologists have tried to say that they got rid of Avard as the leader of the Danites once they found out what he was doing, when the record shows that this could not be further from the truth, and that there were several months where his power and violent rhetoric went completely unchecked by Joseph Smith. This is a huge moral failing on Joseph Smith. I think this chapter makes Joseph Smith look really bad, both as a leader and as a person of virtue. And I think that any Mormon should be concerned about reading this. I don't think the Danites are strongly talked about in the CES letter. I think Jeremy Reynolds talked about other things. It's been a while since I read that document, so I can't remember for sure. But if I was an active member who was not aware of church history, I think this chapter would be extremely, extremely disheartening, disillusioning, and concerning to read. So that's that. Next chapter is going to be really good and getting back into some juicy stuff. So see you then.